Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another version of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to continue talking about Eastern Europe today, and in particular, we are going to be taking a look at Romania, Bulgaria, and then Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, and then Montenegro, Kosovo, and certainly is part of that Montenegro, Macedonia, and then Albania today. So let's take a look and see what our learning targets are for today. I can identify and describe the physical geography, the economics, and the culture of Romania. It's going to be very largely influenced by the Romans. I can identify and explain the economic and cultural traits of Bulgaria. And then we're also going to be able to look at those cultural traits of Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo, as well as Macedonia and Albania. So let's start with just kind of placing ourselves geographically. So certainly we are in Eastern Europe, and in particular, we're looking at the Balkan countries that lie in the Balkan Peninsula. And we can see to the east, there's the Black Sea, and certainly to the west, there's the Adriatic. And certainly, as part of the Balkan Peninsula, would certainly be Greece, which would find its way certainly into the Aegean as well as the Mediterranean. But that kind of gives you an idea of where we are as far as world geography goes. Let's start with Romania today, though. So, Romania is located in the northeastern edge of the Balkan Peninsula. And if we're kind of looking at some of its major physical features, we've got the Carpathian Mountains, which make up about a third of the total area. You can kind of see here the Transylvanian Plateau is certainly in the center. So certainly for those of you who are maybe fans of like horror or monster movies, Transylvania certainly with Dracula has a very unique history with Romania. As far as climate goes, the winters tend to be pretty cold and snowy. That's pretty common in Eastern Europe, especially given elevation as well as their location, both relative and absolute. And certainly their summers tend to be hot, quite sunny, and also quite a bit of rain. When it comes to Romania's economy, I really encourage my students to follow this link, kind of dive a little bit deeper, but just to give you kind of a general sense, a lot of the Romanian economy is based around automobiles, whether it's making physical automobiles, rubber tires, sometimes even distinctive parts. The Dacia cars are also quite popular in Romania as well. I'd encourage you to check out an example of those. When it comes to their culture, we can see it's about 56% of the population tends to live in urban areas, so we still have a pretty high rural population here. They also tend to be of the Eastern Orthodox branch of Christianity. And just to give you a really brief background, the Orthodox Church was created during the Great Schism from the Roman Catholic Church, and they tend to have kind of different interpretations and beliefs. For my students, I really encourage you in your notes here to really dive into that. For those of you who are just listening to learn a little bit more, highly encourage you to look at that. There's certainly some very interesting history there. This is a population, though, that when we look at it culturally, they're shrinking. When our textbook was published in the early 2000s, that population was about 21.6 million people, and it's down to about 19.9. And this is a pretty common theme, this kind of graying or aging population in Europe, particularly here in Romania as well. Bucharest is your capital city. This is a culture, like I mentioned earlier, that is very influenced by the Romans. Language especially tends to be more Latin-based, especially when you compare it to more Slavic-based languages that we'll see in other parts of Eastern Europe. Certainly popular activities that you'll see in Romania, you've got soccer or football, as the rest of the world calls it, chess, gymnastics, and certainly rowing. And you can note it here also some world-class chess players have come from Romania. All right, shifting gears to Bulgaria. This is an area that has quite some fertile lands. The mountains certainly, like the Balkan Mountains, as well as the Rhodope Mountains. We'll take a look at those here on the next slide. When it comes to its economics, though, certainly agriculture is going to play a really important role, especially in the Central Valley. Wheat, corn, sugar beets, and roses certainly all play an important role. Mining still certainly important, especially with the mountains. Zinc and coal tend to be very important, and of course tourism, especially along the Black Sea. So you can see here in the center, we certainly have the Balkan Mountains, and certainly the Rhodope Mountains here in the south, certainly your Central Plains, as well as the Danubian Plain, and certainly the Black Sea again, is going to be really important for tourism, and that's going to bring not only Romanians, but also people from around the world. When we look at Bulgaria, we're talking about a population of about 7.5 million, and they use something called the Cyrillic alphabet, which, again, was kind of created as a way to write the Slavic language. And so I encourage you to kind of play around with that too, maybe even hop on Google Translate or another translating website and check out and see how things might translate from your native language. Shifting gears to their culture also makes sense here. A lot of Eastern Orthodox Christians, but there is a population, about 13%, who follow Islam, and the followers of Islam are Muslims. You're going to see that especially as we go a little bit further east, particularly, especially as we're getting closer to nations like Turkey. That Islamic influence is going to be much greater. Sofia is its capital city. You'll see rhythmic gymnastics, weightlifting, certainly other athletics, chess, wrestling, and boxing. And you can see here from some of the pictures, certainly even some Olympians have made their way from Bulgaria to the Olympics. One of the things we have to touch on in this part of the world is kind of the violent history. So Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and certainly the disputed territory of Kosovo, Macedonia. They all have broken apart as part of some of the shakeup that occurred in the 1980s and early 1990s in Eastern Europe, and certainly part of that is Yugoslavia. After that breakup, there was certainly some violence, and this was an area in which there was genocide occurring, especially around the area of Kosovo today. But widespread ethnic cleansing was put into place by leaders throughout, but particularly one of the central figures was Slobodan Milosevic, who was a tyrant and a war criminal and was actually charged with war crimes for his actions. It's a very violent history. Ethnic cleansing often pits different cultures against each other with the idea of trying to eliminate them. Certainly genocide was one of the war crimes that occurred here too. Very violent history. The United States and other nations did step in as part of NATO. And actually, when we're thinking about American history, this is actually one of the first times that a U.S.-led coalition was able to kind of successfully help to end a genocide. And I've also had some relatives who fought in that campaign in order to cut down on that ethnic cleansing. So let's start with Slovenia. As far as these former Yugoslav republics, start here. This is the most peaceful and tranquil of the areas. It also has a lot of prosperity as far as comparing it to the rest of these republics. There's a very high standard of living here when you compare it to some of these other nations. Also tends to be more Roman Catholic, which again will kind of in some ways branch it out, minus nations like Croatia. But speaking of Croatia, let's start here. Zagreb is its capital, and you have two kind of distinct populations. You have the Croats, which make up about 78%. They tend to be Roman Catholic, and certainly you also have your Serbs, which, if you're kind of thinking about your World War I history, certainly a population here that played a really important role, especially considering the beginnings of World War I. They tend to be more Eastern Orthodox, about 12% of the population. There's some very beautiful beaches in Croatia along the Adriatic. And for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, Dubrovnik, Croatia, actually served as the site of King's Landing for the show Game of Thrones, and since has brought a lot of tourism to Croatia as well. Bosnia, formerly known as Herzegovina, Sarajevo is its capital, very important city. Again, a lot of importance in World War I history. You also certainly have the Dayton Peace Accords. These were signed in 1995 and divided Bosnia into two regions, and they are centered around one government. There was certainly some American involvement as peacekeepers in that deal. When it comes to Serbia and Montenegro, 2006 is when these nations became independent. Belgrade, which is the capital of Serbia, is also our largest city, and they tend to be predominantly Eastern Orthodox. One of the disputed territories is over the idea of the nation of Kosovo. So there are some nations like the United States that do recognize Kosovo as an independent nation, and there are some that do not. And I really encourage you to kind of dive a little bit deeper if you're interested in that history. And again, a very unique part of the history here in Eastern Europe. All right, last two nations for today. Macedonia has its capital city in Skopje, and it's a mixture of kind of ancient churches, Turkish markets, and modern shopping. It's also, of course, the ancient homeland of Alexander, or if you prefer, Alexander the Great. For Albania, this is a nation that suffers from immense poverty. They do rely very heavily on agriculture. They do have mineral wealth, but unfortunately, due to the cost, they're not able to utilize those resources due to funding. It's a population that's about 70% Muslim and 30% Christian. And among the famous Christians that have come from Albania, you have the famous nun and soon-to-be Saint Mother Teresa, who gave a lot of her life to help feeding the poor, particularly in India, but served as an inspiration to Christians as well as other people all around the world. All right, that wraps us up for today, ladies and gentlemen. I really encourage you to check out this check-in quiz just to kind of make sure you're getting the big ideas. For my students, please make sure that you answer these in your guided notes or in your handwritten notes. As always, thank you for listening. Those of you who are not in my class, I really am glad that you've chosen to learn with us today. I really appreciate it. And for my students, please reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and thank you for listening.